Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, let's discuss Dio's 1985 album, Sacred Heart. I almost did this as one of my in defense of videos because this album, for some people, is a really big step down from the two previous Dio albums, Holy Diver and Last in Line. And those albums, in my opinion, those first two Dio records are absolute classics. So I understand how this album feels like a step down. And for me, it is a little bit of a step down, but I do really like this record. And I think that this record sometimes gets overlooked. And part of the thing, too, is the way the band looks at this record. And I don't know if I've discussed this in other videos, but this is a thing where when a band has a difficult time recording an album, and if the album maybe doesn't have the level of success that previous albums have, this is a situation with Black Sabbath's Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die, their last two albums with Ozzy. They were very difficult records to make for the band. Same thing here with Sacred Heart. There was some internal tensions within the band. It was a difficult record to make. So thus the band kind of doesn't look back on this album very fondly. The band, The Last in Line, which features Vivian Cambell, Vinny Appice, who were the guitar player and drummer during these first three Dio albums. Last in Line also originally featured Jimmy Bain on bass, who also played bass on these first three Dio albums. The Last in Line band, sadly, Jimmy Bain passed away after the first Last in Line record. But when they were touring, they never played anything from this record, and the three of them always talked down on this record like they didn't care for this record, especially Vivian Cambell, which again is really a shame because in my opinion, there's a lot of really good stuff on this record. It's, as I just mentioned, it was the last record. Maybe I didn't mention it. It's the last record to feature Vivian Cambell on guitar, and for me, as a young metalhead, the Dio band felt very much to me like the original Ozzy Blizzard of Oz band. Ozzy had Randy Rhoads, Ronnie James Dio had Vivian Cambell. And although I wouldn't say that Vivian is as groundbreaking a guitar player as Randy Rhoads was, for me, and still to this day, when I was younger and still to this day, Vivian Cambell was right up there in my top 5 guitar players. And these early Dio band albums I really loved, and I thought that the guitar playing on these albums was just fantastic. And on this particular record, they also have Claude Schnell on keyboards, and I think I mentioned everybody. So you've got Vivian Cambell guitar, Jimmy Bain on bass, Vinny Appice on drums. Vinny Appice, I'm getting ready to make a video of my favorite hard rock and heavy metal drummers, and Vinny Appice is one of them. He's one of those guys that not only does his drum set sound very unique, the sound of his drums, the way he plays, he has a very heavy, powerful sound. But when he does drum fills, I always think a lot of drummers try to do really fast drum fills, and Vinny Appice can do that. But he also does these really big, like, slow drum fills where his toms always sound huge, and it's like he's throwing boulders or something with his big massive drum fills. So he's a drummer that, to me, I know it's him the second that I hear him. Jimmy Bain, who sadly passed away, I think I mentioned that earlier, after the first Last in Line, the band Last in Line album, the Heavy Crown album. He's a great bass player. He's not super flashy or anything, but he has a really unique bass tone also. He always played with a pick. He always had kind of a bright but punchy bass tone, and he knows how to just play the right thing at the right time. And apparently, too, he was a big part of the songwriting equation. And the band at this point, the way they wrote was basically they just all got in a room together. They jammed on riffs. Ronnie would come in with his vocal melody line. So it was a real organic band process. Everybody contributed to the sound. Ronnie James Dio, what's there to say about him? I've said this before. He's my favorite hard rock, heavy metal singer. And he sounds as great on this as anything. So the album starts off really, really strong for me. It's produced by Ronnie, and the all the Dio, at least the first 3 Dio solo band albums were produced by Ronnie. I didn't really research the ones after this. I'm assuming that he continued to produce them. And the production on this, it's good. It's maybe a little bit, it's a little bit dry. It has a little bit of the vocals sometimes for some strange reason sound like they're distorting a little bit, which is not a big deal, but Ronnie has such a powerful voice. I always just imagine that there was no microphone in the world that could contain Ronnie. So, but it's a good mix. I like the way the guitar sounds on it. The drums are really punchy and everything. The bass, everything's there in check. So it's a good mix. So the album, side 1, starts off really strong for me. It starts off with King of Rock and Roll, which is one of my favorite early Dio band songs. It's just got a really cool driving riff. I love Vivian's solo in this. I mentioned Vivian earlier as being one of my favorite early guitar players, right up there with Randy Rhoads, and he sounds great on this. He has Vivian was different than Randy. He didn't have that classical element to his playing. He had more of a Gary Moore, Rory Gallagher, those were his influences, but he still played outside of just the regular standard blues box. He had a different, he played the blues licks, but he had the technique. He had the blazing technique. I always loved his guitar sound on these records, and this one too sounds great. And I love his guitar solo in King of Rock and Roll. It's got a really cool driving riff. I love the way it's made to sound like it's done live, which it wasn't. It was just done in the studio, and they added the crowd noise later, but it's an awesome one. So I gotta reach up here. My computer screen shut off and I can't see the song titles. All right, so then next is the title track, Sacred Heart, which is another great one. It's a mid-paced one, very epic sounding, great riffing. At this point in the band, Claude Schnell is there, so the keyboards add a nice sort of texture. They just sort of give a textural thing, fill out the sound here and there. There really isn't any, Deep Purple style keyboard soloing or anything. Another Lie, that's a good one. It's maybe not super memorable. It's cool though. It's another cool riff, cool guitar line. I like when it breaks down at the one part and the guitar is playing like sort of this fast like thing. Line while Ronnie sings this line over the top, everybody else sort of drops out. I think that's pretty cool. Rock and Roll Children, this one was a video on MTV that got a lot of video play. I think it's a great one. I remember just totally digging it at the time. I think it's great. It's real catchy. It's kind of Ronnie at his best lyrically, when Ronnie sings about the downtrodden, the common man, and kind of coming to the rescue of those who are overlooked and pushed to the background, the last in line. Well, here, this is sort of the same sentiment, Rock and Roll Children. I can remember that video in my head, the kids running away, because they're being oppressed by their parents and everything. And when you're a 14-year-old, I guess that just resonates with you. So fond memories of early MTV days there. All right, side 2. Now, this is where the album sags for me. This is where some people start to get issues with this record. It's hard to argue with King of Rock and Roll, Sacred Heart, Rock and Roll Children, those, and even Another Lie, So side A is really strong. Side B is where it starts to dip a little bit. Hungry for Heaven. I like that song. For some people, it's way too poppy. And certainly Dio at this point was sort of, appealing to that side. And Dio, in my opinion, always had that side to him. You think back to the Black Sabbath's Heaven and Hell album, songs like Walk Away, Lady Evil, those had a very sort of uplifting, almost popish sensibility to them, and that sort of, maybe he takes that for some people a little bit too far with his song here like Hungry for Heaven, but I still like it. It's super catchy. I'm a sucker for sort of melodic pop but heavy guitars, distorted guitar driven stuff. So there you go. I like it. Like the Beat of a Heart. That's a cool one. I like that. It's got a heavy kind of dark riff to it. Cool vocal line, cool delivery, great drumming in it. Again, this is Vinny Appice, like in his zone for me when they do these like a beat of a cow, dun, 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 when he's just playing those simple beats, but he has a way of just playing a very simple beat and making it sound gargantuan, and that song's a good example of it. Just Another Day. That's a good one. Again, it's maybe a little bit forgettable. Now, here's where the album starts to sag a little. Just Another Day. It's good. Maybe not great. Not up to the caliber of stuff that was on Holy Diver and Last. Even the deep cuts on Holy Diver and Last in Line. Fallen Angel is where it starts to feel like it's starting to lose a little inspiration for me. It has it's just a kind of a mid-tempo. It's cool, but again, it just doesn't rise to the level of Rock and Roll Children, where Rock and Roll Children is maybe around the same tempo. Rock and Roll Children is way more memorable for me with the riffing and the melody lines and the lyrics. This just feels a little bit like, we're starting to run out of ideas. And then Shoot Shoot, a song that I really do not like. Probably my least favorite song from the original Dio band. It just sounds like a total throwaway thing. I don't like the lyrics in it. I don't like the chorus in it. It just feels really just awkward or something. So the album sort of sags and goes out a little bit on a little bit of a down note. Like, it just kind of feels like they were starting to run out of ideas. And whereas on Last in Line and Holy Diver, you had like those albums ended with Shame on the Night and Egypt, great, like, really epic songs. And here you just kind of, it goes out a little bit on a whimper. So maybe a sign of that the band, that sort of internal strife, the chemistry and magic that was there on the first two albums is maybe not there as much on this. But in the end, like I said, it's still a strong album, and it has a lot of really great songs on it. It's a shame that Dio never really revisited with the band much or ever, and the band, The Last in Line, doesn't play anything from this record. I would have loved to hear them play King of Rock and Roll or the song Sacred Heart. And with the Dio band, he never really came back to any of his stuff either. Like, I would have loved to have heard Rock and Roll Children. I think he may have touched back on this album occasionally, but so maybe I'd give it like a 8 out of 10, and a lot of that is because I'm so fond of the chemistry with this original Dio band. I'm so fond of Vivian Cambell. I like the way he was playing on these records. Unfortunately, Vivian would go on, well, not unfortunately for him, he would eventually go on to be in Def Leppard, probably making a huge sum of money. Thank goodness he came back with the Last in Line band, and he's playing like he did on these original records, because he really got away from this style of playing for quite some time, actually. He did have this River Dogs band that he did for a little while, but that really wasn't heavy like this, and I really missed hearing Vivian play in this more heavier style. And the chemistry between him, Jimmy Bain, and Vinny Appice on that first Last in Line record really proved that there was something very special about this original Dio band. And if you hear Vivian's side of the story, he was sort of driven out of the band, and he felt like it was basically a money thing, business stuff, and he felt like he had made a deal with Ronnie early on that Ronnie didn't live up to, and there was a conflict there. And when he brought it up, he claims it was more Ronnie's manager, wife at the time, Wendy Dio, who wanted Vivian out of the band, and really didn't give enough credence to. Yes, Ronnie was the face of the band. Ronnie was the guy that had built up this massive credentials in the world of hard rock and heavy metal with Rainbow and Black Sabbath. So yes, Ronnie was the focal point of the band, but there's no denying that this band, the chemistry, everybody in this band added to what made these early Dio band albums great. So it's a shame that Vivian left, fired, however, whose ever side of the story you want to listen to. Uh, because after this, really, I do really like Dream Evil. That's kind of the last classic sounding Dio album for me. And I would probably put Dream Evil on par with Sacred Heart, maybe even a little bit better, because I think the songs on Dream Evil there's some really strong songs on there. All the Fools Sailed Away, one of my favorite Dio songs. But hey, we'll save that album for another video. So, but then unfortunately after that, Ronnie was never really able to recapture the magic that he had on these first three albums. So. All right, so there you go. Sacred Heart, maybe not as good as the first two Dio band albums, but I think there's a lot of overlooked gems on here. There's a lot of great guitar playing, a lot of great playing from everybody in the band. So it's an album that I do still enjoy, and I actually grab it quite often because it doesn't, it's not as overplayed as some of the stuff on the first two Dio band album, things like We Rock and The Last in Line and Rainbow in the Dark, which Ronnie would play from that point always in his sets after that. So I feel like this album, it feels like there's a lot more deep cuts on it and things that I can come back to that I haven't heard a million times. So, all right, so there you go. Sacred Heart, the Dio Band third studio album, 1985. Let me know down in the comments what you think of this record. I'm curious because it is an album that some people really don't like it. Some people really like it. Part of it for me, I think, is the guitar playing, Vivian Cambell, and the sort of this classic band that pulls at my heartstrings because I so much loved this first incarnation of the Dio band. So, but let me know down in the comments what you think of this record. Make sure you hit like and subscribe, and until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.